Good afternoon and welcome back to today's live webinar. My name is Kyle Bechet. I'm the Communications Manager here at the Leadership Institute. Our topic, tips to running for office. We're going to have an exciting discussion today about what it takes to run for political office and what you should be doing as a candidate to run for office. Joining us to talk about this is Ron Nearing. Ron was the California State Republican Chairman and also was the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor, where he got enough votes to win in any other state besides California. So there you have it. Today he lives in California and is our Director of International Training here at the Leadership Institute. Before we get into today, I would like to remind you, as always, that you can submit your questions to have them answered live by emailing us at live@leadershipinstitute.org or by tweeting at us using the hashtag LIWebinar. With that, Ron, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So, Ron, you've been a candidate, you've been on a number of campaigns, worked closely with them, and you train candidates throughout the country. Tell us about your story. What have you learned about running for office that you can help people today?
Well, I think that the thing that had the biggest impact on my career that ultimately led to being a candidate for office and a public official was when I was 19 years old and I was the president of the College of Publicans at my university in New York, and I heard of this group called Leadership Institute. And I hold a BA in political science, but nothing that I learned in my political science classes prepared me for what it actually takes to run for office and how the political process works in terms of what determines the winner of an election, things like that. So my path got started to actually learn the skills needed to organize and to communicate with the Leadership Institute. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in running for office, if you're a conservative, if you're a liberal, then there are plenty of groups on the radical left that will train you and so on and so forth. But if you're a conservative and you're interested in putting your ideas in action, then you need to get the training necessary in order to learn those skills, because succeeding in politics is not like succeeding in business or succeeding in the nonprofit sector. There's a whole different set of rules that are involved with that, and you learn a lot of that at the more than 50 different programs that LI offers. Based on the skills that I learned at the Leadership Institute, I continued to be the president of the College of Publicans on my campus. I then came to Washington, D.C. I worked in Washington for a number of years. Then I went to San Diego due to opportunities to work in the Republican Party there. And in 2001, I became the chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego County. Now, in California, we have counties that is the size of states. San Diego County is 3 million people. It's about the population of Iowa.
Bigger than my home state of Vermont.
Right, by more than one time. And when I ran for chairman, I said that we were going to put into effect the very things that we teach at the Leadership Institute in terms of the role of a political party and how to win a political campaign and so on. And we did that. And today, I'm very pleased that under what we accomplished, and then my successor, Tony Kovarik, the Republican Party of San Diego County is perhaps the best funded and one of the most successful Republican organizations in the United States. And that we have a mayor in San Diego, even though Republicans are third in voter registration behind Democrats and even behind independents, we have a Republican mayor in Kevin Faulconer who really epitomizes a lot of what we teach at LI. So we did a good job. My team and I running the Republican Party in San Diego. Based upon that success, I became the vice chairman and then the chairman of the California Republican Party. That was tough because on the day I became chairman of the California Republican Party, the party was $4.7 million in debt and was not in good shape. And that's a serious, serious challenge. But again, putting into effect a lot of what we teach at LI, by the time I left office, the California Republican Party had $500,000 in the bank, no debt, no bills, and a really terrific staff. And that's something that we can be proud of. So there are so many opportunities. Maybe you're not interested in running for office today, or maybe you can't even see yourself ever running for office. But what you learn at LI will help you in every aspect of politics, public affairs, or many of the skills taught here will apply in business and the like.
So we get to you're the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor. What are the first tips that you learned in doing that you can give to other candidates? What are the first steps you have to take to run for office, to be a candidate?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I never expected to be the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor of California in 2012 at all. As a matter of fact, and I've told the story many times, that I was closely watching who was filing for the various statewide offices in California in early 2014. And at one point, we didn't have any good, solid Republican candidates running for several different statewide offices: Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Controller, Superintendent of Public Instruction. I mean, this was a real challenge. And even in a left-leaning state like California, it's really important for the major parties, the Republican Party in this case, to be able to put up good quality candidates. Mm-hmm. And so the first tip that I would say is that preparation, through preparation, you create your own luck. And it happened to be that because I had served as California Republican chairman, because I had relationships with the news media, because I had built a statewide network of supporters and volunteers and people who knew me and so on throughout the state by being the state Republican chairman, when that opportunity came and the party needed a good candidate for lieutenant governor, I was in a position to take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And so the more people develop their skills and the more they're out there in the arena doing good things and so on, it really creates its own opportunities. Just like when I was the Republican chairman in San Diego, I never expected to become the California Republican chairman, but because I'd focused on doing that job, we had good results, new opportunities opened. And so the second tip I would say is to recognize that politics is the ultimate meritocracy. And that is that you don't have to come from wealth, you don't have to have a famous last name, you don't have to be someone whose father and great-grandfather and so on and so forth were, old bulls in, your party or whatever like that.
Right.
You can come from any socioeconomic background, choose a party you want to get involved with, do a good job, learn the skills, be a good person, which is an important aspect of that as well, and you can advance.
Right.
My parents were immigrants from Germany. My parents had no one in my family had ever been involved in politics, but because they were from Germany, when I was growing up, I took an interest in what was happening in Europe during the Cold War. My father was a big anti-communist. He didn't like government pushing him around. He didn't like that idea. That's why he came to America. And so no one should ever think that, well, I can only really get involved in politics if, my family or background or anything like that, or you need a PhD. You don't need a PhD in politics. In fact, I would say that many of the things that it takes to win a political campaign, you have to unlearn what you learn in college.
Right.
So those are a couple of the things which I think are very helpful for people to know, to kind of demystify what's involved with running for office.
So getting involved, giving a little of the party helped get you ready to be a candidate in that sense.
Yeah, and I would also add that politics is 75% relationships, and it's 25% everything else. Now, I'm a movement conservative. I've been a movement conservative my entire life. Every single issue down the line, my personal views are in line with the mainstream of the conservative movement. But that having been said, it's very difficult sometimes for people who are really ideologically driven to get into politics and realize that it's not just about ideas. It's not just about which conservative philosopher, Hayek or Milton Friedman, you can quote better. But politics is 75% relationships, meaning your ability to build relationships with people over time is really critical to your success. And so if you're grumpy a lot, you're going to limit yourself by how far you can get involved in politics. But on the other hand, if you're comfortable with people, you like communicating with people, you genuinely engage with people, you really care about other people, then that's a powerful ingredient to succeed in politics.
You touched upon two things there that I want to discuss a little further. The first one being building relationships. When you decide to run for office, you're ready to form your exploratory committee. Who are the people you talk to? Who are some of the people in your home state you should be talking to?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I went through that process when I was deciding whether to run for lieutenant governor. And I had never run for a statewide office before. I had served on a local school board, but I was appointed to fill a vacancy. I've been elected to my county central committee, multiple times, but never something like this. And so it's a big undertaking. And the first thing I did is I got on the phone to the people who I trusted the most and said, we don't have a good we don't have anybody good stepping up to run for lieutenant governor. That really doesn't speak well for our party if we don't have someone stepping up for that office. And it doesn't matter whether it's a powerful office or not, but it's not a good sign if we don't have a good candidate for that office. And so the more we talked about it, the more it seemed like, that's a good thing to do because, and here's another tip, is that the first thing you lose if you're a candidate or even thinking about running for office is your own ability to look at yourself objectively. And that is candidates, you need a good group of people so that you can borrow from their perspective, you can borrow from their point of view. And so you can find out, am I going to be able to raise the money necessary in order to mount a credible campaign? Will the base of the party support me? Will people within the party support me? Will the news media recognize me as a major candidate? Things like that. And I don't trust only my own judgment on that. I need to borrow upon those people I've built relationships with over time. And so there was a lot of time spent on the phone, and it ultimately led to the decision to run. And we won the primary, and that was the number one objective, was to make sure that we got past the primary. We always knew the general election would be a challenge, and that I think is another tip for people, and that is that you have to set realistic expectations. Don't go into something where history and demographics and so on are against you, and then try to sell everybody that you're the magician who's going to be able to accomplish something which no one else can accomplish. You have to be realistic. That doesn't mean you can't be ambitious. It doesn't mean that you can't be aspirational. And how we addressed that in our campaign was that, look, we were challenging an incumbent lieutenant governor for an office that the Republicans had lost in 7 out of the last 7 elections. We knew that it was an uphill battle. And we'd be very upfront with people to say, look, this is an uphill battle. This is not easy. We're clearly the underdog. And then once you acknowledge that, number one, your credibility goes up because, oh, okay, well, he's running an uphill battle and he's not trying to tell me, a fantasy or a fairy tale. But then number two, we have to come up with a reason, well, if it's an uphill battle, why do we have to fight this fight? And that's another aspect which is important, in that the conservative movement is active through its candidates and through its activists. And we have to be able to have champions of our ideas on the ballot. And as Margaret Thatcher said, first you win the argument, then you win the election, right? And we as conservatives have to win the argument over the public policy issues of the day. We can only do that if we have good candidates on the ballot.
The other thing you talked about a little while ago is building a message. You're looking at your state. You're talking to people about should I run for office? How do you start building a message about why I'm running for office? Why?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, because some conservatives kind of miss this. The first thing when you're developing a message is you have to have a vision. And that vision has to be both aspirational, meaning it's better than things are today, and it has to be realistic, in that people have to believe that we just might be able to do that. And so I had a vision for the state of California where we want to make our state the best place in America to do business. And we want to make sure that people can remain in our state instead of having to leave California for Arizona or Florida or somewhere else, which is breaking apart families and so on and so forth. So you have to have a vision. And then number two is that leaders have to have the ability to turn vision into reality. And I've often said when I speak for Leadership Institute that if you're only interested in talking about how the world should be, then maybe you should be a philosopher or be in the clergy or something, and you can just talk about how the world ought to be. But if you are aspiring to a position of leadership, and every public office is a position of leadership, then you have to be able to demonstrate how have you in the past been able to turn ideas into reality, turn a vision into reality. And fortunately, I had that experience when I was chairman of the Republican Party in San Diego, which was badly in debt when I took it over, and then it turned into one of the strongest Republican parties in the world, not only because in the country, not only because of me, but because of what we were able to accomplish together. And I had a record at the California Republican Party where we took over an organization that was badly in debt and had many, many internal problems. And through 4 years of hard work, we were able to turn that around. So the fact that I could point to that was very helpful in terms of having some measure of credibility, which is why another point is that the first time you decide that you're going to get involved to put your name on the ballot, don't be delusional and think that, well, the only offices that are suitable for my level of, fabulousness is to be a senator or a governor or whatever. we need good quality candidates at every level of government. And we need good quality school board members, fire board members, mosquito abatement districts, city council, you name it. We need good candidates. In my county alone of San Diego, we have over 980 elected offices. And if we don't field good quality candidates, then who's going to field candidates? It's going to be the environmental groups, it's the radical environmental groups, it's going to be the labor unions who are particularly focused on the schools, and that's why we need good people to step up. And as we have elected conservatives to good conservatives to local government office, they become prepared to run for higher office. So the first time I got involved in politics was not to run for some statewide office, but because I had been involved for a long time.
I think that to that point is, if you look at what Republicans have been able to do at the state level in state legislatures by fielding good candidates, we have an overwhelming amount of state legislators throughout the country, where we have more state houses and state senates than we have had ever or in a long time.
Right, Republicans have done terrific at the state level, and we have to do better. Republicans, in my opinion, have to do better at the local government level. We do very well, meaning conservatives, speaking nonpartisan, conservatives do well in rural areas, and we do kind of well in suburban areas. We don't do as well in urban areas. And so this is a real challenge for us in the future. But in my state of California, you can be a conservative, Republican, but you have an advantage in running for office in an urban area in that the rules say that the party label doesn't appear on the ballot. So you get to define yourself. You don't have to worry about what that party affiliation is and all of the preconceived notions that might be in people's heads about what that party label means. You can establish yourself. But you can only do that if you have a campaign that's strong enough, raise enough money, has enough people involved, that you can reach the number of people that you need to reach in order to be able to define yourself.
Naturally. Sticking with the topic of messaging for a second, would you say it's more important for candidates that might be watching at home today to look at local issues or national issues when they're building their case to voters to why they should be?
A couple things. One is that candidates have to be strong in 3 areas, not just one. The kind of poli-sci 101, which I took, the poli-sci 101 and kind of media view of the world is that all candidates exist only in one plane called ideology, left, right, moderate, etc. And that whichever candidate is closer to the center of that mythical bell curve is going to win the election. But that doesn't explain how a Chris Christie becomes the governor of New Jersey. I don't even think it's legal to be a Republican in New Jersey. It doesn't explain how Susana Martinez becomes the governor of New Mexico, Kevin Faulconer becomes the mayor of San Diego, Rudy Giuliani becomes the mayor of New York City. I mean, all of these places, the candidate who I just mentioned was further from the center of the ideological bell curve than their Democrat opponent, yet somehow they won. There must be something more than just ideology, and there are 2 other dimensions. One of them is the candidate's narrative or their story. What have they done with their life? Rudy Giuliani was a prosecutor. Chris Christie was a prosecutor. Corruption was an issue and crime was an issue in both of their races. Ditto Susana Martinez in New Mexico. So having a good narrative, a good story about what you have done with your life and what you have accomplished can have a very powerful impact on your ability to succeed. The third area is with your skill. So 1 is your philosophy, your ideas, 2 is your narrative or your story, and 3 is your skill. And you need to have the skills to organize and to communicate. In terms of whether candidates should focus on local or national issues, you have to be prepared that if you run for a local or a statewide office, a local or a state office, you have to be prepared to answer questions about what's happening in the country. And the reason is that voters want to talk about what they want to talk about, and they have every right to do so. So you could be running for your local city council, and you could be asked a question about what you think about ISIS, what you think about Barack Obama, etc. And the correct answer is not, I'm running for a local office and I don't want to talk about your issue. That's never the correct answer. You have to be able to speak to that. When I was running for lieutenant governor, in the month of September of 2014, the whole discussion in the country changed, and everyone was concerned about Ebola and ISIS. That's what everybody wanted to talk about. I was running for Lieutenant Governor of California. People wanted to talk about that. And you know what we talked about? We talked about what they wanted to talk about. So candidates really need to be sensitive that just because you're running for one office, don't ever tell a voter, that's not relevant to the office I'm running for. You have to have an answer. And very often, how many times have we heard conservatives say, well, I'm not going to talk about social issues. Okay, that's a really nice idea. And that's going to last just as long until someone asks you a question about it. And it will probably be a reporter or an editorial board member. When I ran, the only time the question of abortion or marriage came up was from newspaper editorial boards. No one else on the campaign trail. It didn't matter whether I was in line at Costco buying a hot dog, or if I was, on boarding a plane and people wanted to talk to me. It didn't matter. No one ever brought those subjects up, except for the newspaper editorial. And you have to have an answer. And so therefore, we can kind of, and very often we have people in our donor community who say, why do conservatives keep talking about these issues? Part of it's going to be that people are going to ask about it, and you have to have an answer. And so you have to be prepared for that, regardless of the office. And then, of course, you have to have solutions to make people's lives better at the level of government you're running for. So if you're running for city council and you only want to talk about the United States Constitution, you're not going to be able to frame a good rationale for why people should elect you. If you're running for local office, you should be prepared to talk about barking dogs, potholes, roads. It may not be the most glorious things in the world, but it most directly impacts people's quality of life.
Right. I think at the local level, people would much, yes, they want to talk about some of those bigger issues, but also it's important to know, we want to keep the swimming pool open up for an extra hour until whatever day of the year or something like that. So I agree, those issues are just as important. So the other big thing that I see a lot of times come up, and candidates who attend our Future Candidate School or any of our other schools ask about, is fundraising. Where do candidates start with fundraising? If you're a brand new candidate, it's your first time running, how do you navigate that field?
Yeah, fundraising can be one of the most intimidating parts of running for office, particularly for someone who's new. How do I get people to invest in me and my campaign, especially if it's an uphill battle? And the first thing that we have to do is kind of demystify the entire area of political fundraising, because it's not what you see on television. It's not just the latest with some look, if you run for local office, there's probably not going to be a super PAC that's going to come in and it's not what you see on Fox News. It's not what you see on CNN. So we have to demystify it. So I'm going to say first, LI offers some fundraising schools. People should go to it. We offer the Campaign Academy, which dedicates an entire day. One of the 5 days is all about fundraising. That's important to go to, because number one is going to kind of demystify it, and number two is you're going to learn about what we call the donor pyramid, which is to recognize that there's a small number of donors who can make a big contribution. There's a much larger number of potential donors out there who could give a small contribution, and then there are many donors in between who could give a medium-sized contribution, and donors at different levels give for different reasons. Very often your low-dollar contributors, who are so important to conservative candidates and causes, very often those low-dollar contributors, small-dollar contributors, they're very ideologically driven. They care about a particular issue, and they want a champion for that issue. And if you're a champion for that issue, they will make a contribution. Even if you're not expected to win, even if you're the underdog candidate, they're going to make a contribution if you're representing, if you're embodying an issue which they care passionately about. Your mid-level donors will write a bigger check, make a bigger contribution than some of your small-dollar contributors, but for them, they want to give in a social setting. They want to go to an event. They want to go to a reception. They want to go to a barbecue. They want to go to something, because for them, part of politics for them might be like expensive dating, right? And that, in other words, they're going to make a contribution, but they want to go to something for it. And I've seen lots of great fundraisers that take place at a ball game, that take place out in the parking lot, that take place at a picnic, that take place at someone's house. By the way, great venue for holding fundraising events is in people's homes. Number one, everybody wants to see someone else's home. It's kind of interesting, like, ooh, let's see what the Smiths home looks like, and so on. And it keeps your costs way down. Holding, this notion that that money is raised at big, fancy political dinners that go on for hours and hours on end and take place in a fancy hotel. I see a fundraising event proposal for a fancy hotel, and I run the other way because I know what the costs are like.
Right.
You're going to pay $100 a plate to buy someone dinner. You may not be able to charge much more than $100, $150, $200, and so instantly half or more of the money that you raise is going to be handed to the hotel, plus an 18% service charge, plus the parking, plus all these additional costs. So when I was running for an office, again, that my party had not won in 7 elections. You might think, well, how were you able to raise any money for that office? We raised the most money through 2 things. Number one is that I would go visit every Republican Women's Federated Club in the state of California that I could possibly get to, because these Republican women volunteers are the backbone of my party. And not only do they contribute time and energy and effort, and they're out registering voters, and they're out at the county fair and so on, but when they are at their meeting and candidates come in, and if you connect with them on the issues that they really care about, they're going to make a contribution. And every time we spoke, there were people who made contributions, and we were so thankful that they were willing to step up for an uphill battle that everyone knew was an uphill battle, but they were willing to make an investment in the campaign, and that's really terrific. And then the second way we were able to raise funds is at fundraisers at people's homes. So we had a volunteer leadership team statewide, and people were willing to organize a fundraising event at someone's home. We would raise $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, maybe $5,000 at those events, and that helped to keep gas in the tank. That helped to, fund our being able to get around the state. And at the end of the day, our campaign garnered 3.1 million votes, 42% of the vote in a two-way race. That was pretty good. And we were the number 3 vote getter in the state among Republicans, the number 6 Republican vote getter statewide in that election, because we were able to raise enough money to be credible and to get our message across.
And building for the future. I mean, you didn't win this one, but hopefully you can win a couple of, well, not
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
You've sort of already spoke to this, but Jason, who's watching today, wrote in. He's he's a small town local candidate, and he wants to know, what are the best ways of fundraising and asking your friends and family for money? I think you already touched on it a little bit, but maybe speak exactly to maybe running for dog catcher or local council or something.
Yeah, this is important in that when you first make that decision to run for office, you need to be able to reach out to your friends, your family, your Christmas card list, people who you know, and say, I'm stepping up, I'm doing something really important, I'm really excited to do it. It's something that I think I have to do. I think I'll be good at it, and I would love to have your support. And you reach out and say, would you invest in this undertaking I'm about to take on? I'm going to put in a tremendous amount of time. I'm going to take time away from my family. I'm going to take time away from everything I love to do in order to do this, because I think it's important for the community or for the state or for the country. And would you invest in me? And just get on the phone and ask people. And most of them may say no. Many of them, however, you don't need everybody to say yes. You don't even need most of them to say yes. You need enough of them to say yes so that you can pay your filing fee, so that you can cover the initial costs that you need to get up and running, and go on from there. That's the easiest money you'll be able to raise in the campaign. And that's we can draw a lesson by looking at the Republican presidential contest right now, in that none of the candidates who've dropped out, they don't drop out because of the polls. They don't drop out because if you're a challenger, the polls are always going to be low at the beginning, right? Nobody drops out because of the polls. They drop out because they run out of money. And here's the trap that candidates have to avoid. You raise that early money that you're able to put in the bank and pay for initial things. But you have to recognize that's easy money, and it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to maintain that month after month. But if you raise, let's say, $10,000 from your friends and family in the first month, and you spend 10 in the first month, and then now you're spending 10 per month, but then in month number 2, you only raise $1,000, well, guess what? Now you're $9,000 in the hole beginning on week 9, and that's not a good position to be in. So you have to, one of the things that we did is we were very, very disciplined in our campaign in that we avoided recurring expenses whenever possible. We didn't spend money we didn't have, and there were lots of things we wanted to do, but we just couldn't do them, because if we ran the campaign into debt, the stress level for everyone in the campaign is going to go through the roof, and it's going to paralyze us. And then we're going to get bad press when the financial disclosure reports come out and we don't have any money in the bank, and we have a lot of debt. So you're going to raise the most money from the people you have the best relationships with. So if you go to your Microsoft Outlook or your phone, however many contacts you have in this is going to be an indicator of how much money you're going to be able to raise. If you only know 7 people, you're not going to raise as much money as if you know 7,000 people.
Another one of our listeners wanted a quick clarification on something. You mentioned women's federated clubs. Can you give us some examples of what those clubs are to those who might not be familiar with them?
Yeah, in the state of California, we have the California Federation of Republican Women, which is the umbrella organization for literally hundreds and hundreds of local Republican women's clubs that are formed throughout the state, and they tend to meet. Usually they meet once a month. Usually they meet at a lunch type event. I remember a particular big meeting in Fresno, the Fresno County Republican Women Federated meeting, huge room, wonderful. The Mayor Ashley Swearingen, who wound up being one of my running mates, she was our candidate for controller, was there as well. Great turnout. We raised several $1,000s from the members who were there, and that is an infrastructure that I was able to tap into because I had built a relationship with many of those activists through my time being state Republican chairman. And so it goes back to the importance of politics is 75% relationships. So those clubs in your party, whether you're a Democrat, Libertarian, Republican, et cetera, there is an infrastructure that is out there already, and it's important to tap into that infrastructure and those people and be a champion for what brings them to politics.
Great. Well, I just want to take a moment before we move on here. Thank you for sending in your questions. I would, at this time, like to remind you, you can send in your questions and have them answered by emailing us at live@leadershipinstitute.org or tweeting at us using the hashtag LIWebinar. So with that, we're at the point of the campaign where you've announced your candidacy. You're a candidate. Let's talk a little bit about the actual campaign and some of the stuff that we do once we've prepared to run for office. Can I run a campaign on my own?
There's one person who should not be the campaign manager, and that's the candidate. It's been said that lawyers who represent themselves have a fool for a client. Candidates should not run the campaign, and there's a good reason for that. Number one, candidates lose all objectivity about themselves. And it seems like their IQ drops by 20 points the minute they file their paper, and they just get crazy. They become hypersensitive to what anybody says about them. They wind up reading every tweet and every Facebook post, and they take it all so personally. And you need to have a team around you, even if it's volunteers. And everyone on our campaign was a volunteer. Campaign manager was a volunteer, press secretary was a volunteer. Everybody was a volunteer. And by the way, the most important people in the campaign are the volunteers, because they enable so much to get done, because you can't raise enough money to pay all these people to do it. And
you can buy them pizza once in a while.
And you have to take care of volunteers, right? Because they're doing something very valuable to you. It's not that, well, we're just giving you our time. There's no valuable. It's very, very valuable. So candidates should not run their own campaign. So I had a terrific campaign manager, Nina Armstrong, who did a wonderful, wonderful job. And she was a former sales executive at Hewlett-Packard, and so had a very successful business career. And she brought a lot of her people skills to the campaign and just did a marvelous, marvelous job. A campaign manager really has 3 main responsibilities, and this is critically important for people to understand. The tendency is to just kind of judge by what people see on television. What a campaign manager does is, the campaign manager, spends a lot of money in terms of making sure things happen. They get a headquarters, they make sure the mail happens, they make sure the TV happens and things like that. That's only one part of what a campaign manager does. So 3 things a campaign manager has to do. Number one is, campaign manager has to make sure that the fundraising of the campaign is happening. The campaign manager should not be the fundraiser. In fact, the person who raises the most money for the campaign is going to be the candidate. But the manager has to make sure that the fundraising is happening. In other words, you have a business. Every campaign is like a startup. You have to make sure money is coming in all the time, and it's the manager's job to make sure that is happening by whoever is responsible for that, working with the candidate so the candidate is doing their job raising the money. Number two is a campaign manager has to run the business side of the campaign. Budgets, personnel, HR. If there's a headquarters, making sure the headquarters is properly managed, that volunteers are being taken care of, that campaign finance reports are being filed, that the rules are being followed, things like that. The campaign manager has to make sure that the business side of the campaign is working. And the third area is then the high visibility stuff, that the political programs of the campaign, in-person contact, earned media, whether there's paid media, precinct walking, volunteers, all of the campaign stuff, all the voter contact activity, that is happening. The tendency is that if you hire someone who's not been in a campaign before, or you've hired someone who's only been involved on the spending side of the campaign, that they won't make sure that the fundraising is happening, and they won't make sure that the business side of the campaign is happening. And that can cause big problems in the future, because then when that fails, the candidate is going to feel this irresistible urge to go in and solve the problem, and then the candidate is playing campaign manager. The other reason why you don't want the candidate doing that is that the candidate should be spending 99% of their time doing three and only three things. One is asking people for their time, meaning to volunteer. Two is asking people for money, and that is to make a contribution to the campaign. And number three is ask people for their vote by either going on talk radio, communicating through the media, communicating with people in person, whatever that is. If a candidate is spending their time doing any of those three things, and by the way, if you find a candidate who has a very nice plush office in the campaign office, you should be very concerned, because I don't want the candidate in the campaign office. We didn't even have a campaign office. I spent all my time in the field because there's no votes to be had in the campaign office. I need to be out in the field.
Great. So we have the campaign manager, and the answer to this question obviously grows larger as you move up closer towards presidential elections. But what are some of the other key essential roles that you should be having one person look at, maybe?
Yeah, ideally, the functions that need to take place in a campaign are the same if you're running for state house, you're running for governor, or if you're running for president. All the same functions need to happen. The only difference is, in a presidential campaign, you have this many people doing it, and in a city council race, you have far fewer people doing it. And those functions include, number one, there has to be an administrative part of the campaign to make sure that you're taking care of the legal matters, filing, campaign finance reports, whatever the legal requirements are, things like contracts, things like that.
Scheduling seems to be a big deal.
Scheduling is a big deal. So there's an administrative part of the campaign.
Okay.
Then there's a fundraising component to the campaign. Somebody has to be thinking about how we're raising money this week, how we're raising money next week. Who's putting the call list together for the campaign, for the candidate to call? It's best if someone else is putting that list together and the candidate can just spend their time on the phone rather than kind of digging through old business cards and wondering who should I, call next or things like that. So administration, fundraising, and then what I would call political or programs, meaning, are we going to do mail? Are we going to do phone calls? Are we going to do digital? Are we going to do door-to-door? The political side of that. It's very important that candidates make sure that all of the legal stuff gets taken care of properly. So if you only pay one person, it's the treasurer or compliance officer of the campaign. That may be an attorney, a campaign finance attorney, an accountant. Very often you have local accountants who specialize in political accounts that know all of the state or local or federal campaign finance laws and will handle that. So those are some of the key areas that somebody should be responsible for that. Ideally, you can access enough people and you get started early enough that, okay, Mary's going to handle the fundraising. Mary hasn't done political fundraising before, but she has experience as a realtor. So she's used to dealing with people, she's used to phone calls and so on and so forth. So then you identify those people in advance, and hopefully you get started early enough that you can send them to Leadership Institute to get some training so that they then can learn some of the nuances that otherwise they're going to have to learn in the field, and that you can get a real advantage by not having to, by giving them that training in advance.
The other thing, so as a candidate, how do you avoid giving the wrong idea about yourself? So, the optics of being a candidate.
Yeah, we've seen this very often happen. You have to define yourself. Candidates have to define who are you as a person. It's not just about your philosophy about tax reform, or your philosophy about property rights, or your philosophy about life and marriage, and so on. Those things are important, but there are plenty of people who will disagree with you on some of those issues, but they're going to vote for you anyway if they like what they see, if they like who they interact with. And so a couple of things. One is, the moment you step out of your house, there's no such thing as an off day. So I will not forget, so I'm just running around, running errands. I go to Costco, I'm standing in line, buying a hot dog at Costco. Someone walks right up to me and says, "Hey, aren't you Ron Nearing? Aren't you running for Lieutenant Governor?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." Like, what are you doing here? Well, I have to buy a lawnmower like anyone else does, or whatever that is. So you're always on, and you just can't assume that you have that anonymity anymore. Number two is, you have to make sure that your life is in order, and this is really something that gets overlooked. In that, do you have the time necessary to do this? Do you have the support of your family? Do you have young kids at home? Is that going to be a factor? What does your wife or your husband think about you running for office? Things like that. Do you have that support network? Because and it's not just a matter of saying, "Okay, honey, you can go do that," but do you have someone to call at 10 o'clock at night when you're driving home from that event and it was a bad day, and so on and so forth? Do you have that personal support network that you need in order to do that? And then people should exercise common sense, and that is that be aware of all of your social media posts. You should be aware of all of the things that you say and do in public. If you get into a fight with the guy at the gas station, even if the guy at the gas station was wrong because he bumped into your car or whatever, someone's going to take out their phone, they're going to record that, and if they recognize you, that's going to be up on social media, and then you're going to have a whole other set of problems to deal with. So you just have to be careful, and you should be conscious and aware. And if you're not willing to be that deliberate in how you conduct your life, then you're going to have to think about whether or not you want to do something like running for office. So, so be aware of those sort of things. There's a joke that no one's going to be able to run for president in 20 years because of all of the Facebook posts that are already up there on the internet somewhere. Yeah. So, people should be aware of of that and how you conduct yourself, because people care more about the type of person you are than your philosophy. Your philosophy is going to be important, but first they want to know, are you a good person? Are they going to like you? Or are you going to be a bully? Or are you going to be a good person?
Right, naturally. In your home county, and I want to talk a little bit about your election here. In your home county, you won San Diego, even though, as you mentioned earlier, you defeated a Democratic incumbent in your home county of San Diego, even though Republicans were third in terms of registration in that county. How does this happen? What role does a strong party organization play in this? Maybe.
Yeah. So in San Diego County, like I said earlier, big county, 3 million people. Half of them live in the city of San Diego. In the city of San Diego, we're third in registration. In the county of San Diego, we're second in registration. And I won that county in a total of 38 counties out of 58. My opponent, Gavin Newsom, won the bigger counties that tend to be on the coast. So he won really in two regions of the state, and that is the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles, and that is what gave him the margin necessary for victory. But in San Diego, we have a big coastal county with 3 million people that I won. And that's a big deal. And we owe a lot of that success to the strength of the Republican Party organization, not just the Republican Party loosely defined, but the Republican Party of San Diego County was critical to my success. Because when you're running for a statewide office, whether it's Secretary of State, Controller, et cetera, chances are you're not going to operate a statewide get out the vote precinct organization by yourself. The office just does not garner enough attention for you to mobilize an army of 20,000 people to walk their neighborhoods. So the candidates for statewide office have to leverage the strength of the local party organizations, which is why party infrastructure is so important. So in our county, the Republican Party mobilizes precinct walkers. The Republican Party provides a platform online, digitally, large Facebook presence, large Twitter presence, et cetera. The party also does a series of mailings to Republican voters in the county by featuring the statewide candidates and other local candidates and providing all that information in a single mailer. They provide a real service to Republican voters, and it influences votes because by being featured in there, it lends credibility. It shows that that the party stands behind its candidates, and so the strength of state and particularly local party organization is so important. It literally can make the difference between victory and defeat. My friend John McCann, who we call Landslide John McCann, won a seat on the Chula Vista City Council. Chula Vista is the second largest city in San Diego County, and he won by 2 votes. And you could say that everyone could take credit for the victory, right? Because everyone could say, I delivered 2 votes for that. But clearly it was the strength of the candidate combined with the strength of the party organization. And so that's why getting involved in your party is just as valuable as running for office. I mean, we need good party chairman, party vice chairman, party precinct volunteers, and so on. One of the most valuable things that I did learn in my political science classes was that and I believe this to this day, it's been proven in my experience, the most important person in the party is not the chairman, it's not the candidate. The most important person in a party is that precinct volunteer who goes door to door and visits the people, the members of their party in their neighborhood and gets them to turn out and vote. That's the most important person in the party. If you don't have that, then you are limited in how much you can do for candidates.
Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, you have to work with your party on getting all of this, getting your candidate.
Candidates have an interest in a strong party. And a party has an interest in strong candidates. Now, sometimes people in your consultant class may have different opinions about that, but I think the most enlightened consultants recognize that there needs to be a strong party organization because that is a platform upon which the candidates can build their campaigns.
Mm-hmm. We have time for a couple more questions here, so I want to get to a few of these questions to get the rest of our presentation today. You talked a little bit about messaging earlier, and it seems a lot of times that a lot of people say that conservatives are good at talking about what they're against, but not so much what they're for. What advice do you have for candidates watching today to talk about what they're for?
Yeah, I think this is important for anyone who's a conservative because there's an unfortunate tendency sometimes among conservatives to seize upon the anti-side of the argument. We're against big government, we're against amnesty, we're against this, we're against that, and so on and so forth. Whenever we are in a fight, we need to be on the pro side of the argument. Whatever it is, we want to be on the pro side. The other team wants to put us on the anti-side, which is why the other team always calls us anti-labor, anti-science, anti-woman, anti-elderly, anti-student, anti-this, they're always putting that anti-label on us. And sometimes people on our side of the aisle embrace that, say, yes, I'm against A, B, C, whatever. You need to back out of that. You need to unlearn that and get on the pro side of that argument. And because because there's a natural tendency for people to wind up favoring the pro side of an argument, all other things being equal. So yes, we can talk about what we're against, but we need to define ourselves by defining what we're for. So that's one critical thing for conservatives to recognize. I was giving a presentation in New York 2 days ago. I said, I'm a conservative. I'm just not in a bad mood about it. And everybody laughed. Now, why did people laugh? Because it spoke to something that people kind of recognize to be true, and that conservatives too often come across as cranky. Number 2 is that we need to be clear on what our intentions are. On the left, they always talk about their intentions. We want people to have free healthcare. We want people to have free, college tuition. They want, whatever they want. Whether they can deliver, entirely different story, right? But they always talk in terms of their intentions. Conservatives, we rarely talk about our intentions, and that's a missed opportunity when we do that. We might talk about how we want to adhere to the Constitution and we want to have limited government and so on, but why? We never talk about the benefits. We know that limited government, individual liberty, free markets generate prosperity around the world. But that case doesn't make itself. We have to make that case. So think about this. When's the last time you watched a conservative speaker on YouTube or on the news, and they were talking about adhering to the Constitution, respecting the Constitution, which we're all for, but when's the last time you saw someone actually talk about the benefits of doing so? The real tangible benefits of doing so. Very often that's not particularly well defined, so we have to talk about what our intentions are as well.
Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to go to our audience for one, and then I have one final question to take us out. Jamie, one of our listeners today, wants to know about cross-party. They are a Republican conservative at heart, but they live in a Democratic community. How do they go about, do they have to take more liberal stances on things? What advice would you give somebody that has to?
First is that people should never either, let's talk about what not to do first. Don't misrepresent what your beliefs are. Don't try to paint yourself as someone who you're not. Don't pander. These are not things that are good to have happen in a society. You should be proud of who you are, but also you should be able to communicate with people on the issues that matter to them. So, does that mean, but we should be careful about the signals that we send. So when I go to San Francisco, it was clear I was a conservative Republican candidate for lieutenant governor. But when I would go on the Ron Owen show in San Francisco, do I introduce myself by saying I am the rock-ribbed, Tea Party-supported conservative Republican candidate for lieutenant governor and frown a lot? No, because that's going to send a bunch of signals that are intuitively people in that market are going to respond negatively to. So instead, especially when I would go into an area which was not a heavily Republican area, I would always start by talking about my story. And people want to know about you. They want to know, that's fine, well, what you think about taxes and so on. We'll get to that. But they want to know a little bit of something about you. And so I would talk about how my story didn't start in California. My parents weren't even born in America. They suffered under Nazi Germany. They immigrated in 1961, and I would start with that story. And then once they get to know you, then we could talk about some of these other things as well. There's a wonderful book that I recommend for every conservative watching today, and that is The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt of the University of Virginia. Just Google The Righteous Mind. Go to your computer, Google that, buy the book, read it. Very, very valuable, and that will it will change your life in a wonderful, wonderful way, and that will give you insight in how people judge and choose and how to communicate more effectively. And that's the best single answer that I can give to that viewer. Okay.
So my final question is, if you go to the Leadership Institute's website and you type in leadershipinstitute.org/writings, 2 articles that'll come up are the biggest mistake of winning candidates and the biggest mistake of losing candidates. What are those? What is the biggest mistake a candidate that wins or loses can make?
Right. Well, Morton Blackwell has those 2 great publications, and I highly recommend them at that web address, which again is leadershipinstitute.org/writings. So I don't want to spoil the surprise for anyone going to that, but I would say that one of the biggest mistakes that candidates make is underestimating what is involved with running for an office. And that is, there's a tendency to think that, well, I can just kind of do this in my spare time. It will consume, it's like government, which consumes all available money plus 20%. The campaign will consume all available time plus 20% or plus some percentage thereof. And you have to be prepared for that. So that is something that's very often overlooked by both winning as well as losing candidates. I would say a particular mistake among losing candidates is giving up. It's okay if you ran for school board and lost, but you know what you did? In the course of that, you became a better candidate, you learned a lot, and you built up your name ID, and maybe you're positioned now to run for a city council or for a future office. Maybe the same one, maybe a different one. So there are no dead ends in politics. There are some cul-de-sacs which we can back out of, but every campaign, winning or losing, is a learning experience.
Right, so we're always learning stuff as candidates.
We are.
Which is great, and you can always come back to Leadership Institute trainings to get those.
That's right.
Helpful tips. Ron, thank you for joining us today. This was a great hour. I had a fun time, and I'm sure that everyone at home is excited about running for office now, and we're going to have a bunch of people filing for office the next couple of days now.
Terrific.
If you continue to want to learn about this topic, I would suggest going to leadershipinstitute.org/training, looking for different campaign academies that are coming up in the next couple of days that will be held throughout the nation. 2 coming up are Oklahoma City and Georgia, if I'm correct. So you can go to our website and see that. You can also check out details to our Arlington training for the Campaign Management School. All great times if you want to continue this to learning about what it takes to win and run in an election. With that, thank you all for joining us today. This was an exciting topic. As always, it was recorded and will be online for your viewing later at leadershipinstitute.org/activism-on-demand, which the web address is at the bottom of our screen right now. Stay tuned for details about our next exciting webinar in 2 weeks. There'll be another exciting conversation we will have here in the studio. And with that, have a good night, and if you watch out for that snow out there tonight.